A warm welcome this afternoon to our session on Creel Food. As Shane says, my name is Donald Reid. I'm chair of Slow Food Scotland. And we have this event as part of Terra Madre Fringe. Now, for those of you who haven't worked it out previously, Terra Madre means Mother Earth, and it's an event which Slow Food International conjured up 20 years ago, almost, and as a biannual event happening in Turin. This year it's not happening in person. It can't, inevitably, and it's gone online. And as a contribution from the UK, we're putting together this Terra Madre Fringe event. Across 4 days, there's a terrific lineup of films, tastings, debates, panel discussions, keynote speeches from some of the UK's leading food figures. So if you haven't already seen it, please have a look at the Terra Madre Fringe website, or you can access it through slowfood.org.uk. Now, our focus this afternoon is to look at shellfish, and in particular, the wild harvested shellfish that has the high gourmet cachet: lobster, langoustine, scallops. In many ways, these are the poster boys and girls of food from Scotland. I mean, indeed, the whole UK. The French, Spanish, Italians may harbour a bit of a disdain when it comes to food from Britain. And however ignorant that viewpoint might be, especially today with so much good food around, if you know where to look, one thing that will reliably make them sit up and pay attention is fresh Scottish shellfish. When food and drink from Scotland is championed by governments, trade bodies, exporters then expect scallops, langoustines and lobsters to be on the brochure cover, to be in the minister's speech and have a starring role in the video, the one with the beguiling folk music, right up there alongside things like whiskey and beef. So the most recent fisheries statistics say that the value of shellfish caught in Scottish waters in 2019 was around £200 million. Which is about a third of the overall total fisheries sales. What called nephrops or langoustine are the second most valuable of the wild caught species. And the vast majority of these shellfish are exported, with close on £100 million worth of langoustine going to Spain, France and Italy alone, and around £75 million worth of scallops to the same three countries. Now, it's worth just mentioning briefly that the majority of langoustine and scallops are harvested by the method of dredging, or scraping the seabed, most happening relatively close to the coast. Creels, or lobster pots, those basket-like things you sometimes see piled up on piers in fishing villages or stacked on the back of small 1- or 2-man fishing boats, they're used to catch lobster, crab, and there's another means to catch live langoustine. And then the alternative way to harvest scallops is for them to be collected by divers. Now, these contexts and issues are very important, and they're often contentious, and we will come back to them, no doubt, in the course of this next hour. Yet, however venerated these shellfish are in the restaurants of Madrid or Paris, they're not really part of Scottish gastronomic culture. Certainly not traditionally. The historian Annette Hope indicates that even in the 1960s, langoustine, or prawns, as they're commonly called with slightly disparaging understatement on the west coast of Scotland, langoustine were, along with lobster, regarded by fishermen as a bit of a nuisance. They got tangled up in nets. They were nippy, hardly worth all the effort to eat. I mean, if anything, shellfish in general, though probably more particularly whelks and limpets and mussels, were regarded as poverty food. The historic records have almost no evidence of Scots eating, never mind delighting in, or building dishes around scallops or lobsters or langoustine. And in many ways, that's perpetuated today, with a distrust of the raw product being replaced by a distrust of the cost, the gourmet cachet that locals don't necessarily buy into. And as a result, chefs and cooks are understandably reluctant often to push them too hard on their menus. It's still special occasions, showstopper stuff. And it's often bemoaned that all this shellfish flies off to France and Spain from the west coast of Scotland, and the locals never get a look in. Yet, suddenly, the imminence of Brexit, with the questions it still asks about the viability of both export markets in terms of additional tariffs, and distribution models in terms of delays and paperwork when you're trying to transport live shellfish, together with the arrival of COVID, which all but closed down the markets both abroad and even in Britain, where there was demand from restaurants, are asking fundamental questions about the place of shellfish, both as an export commodity, or if that fails, what sort of home market there is. So now that the shellfish isn't flying off to Spain and France, is this the time for the chance for locals to enjoy and embrace these delicacies? Or for reasons of tradition and cost and image, is the local market in reality too tiny to mention? Is it even realistic to think that a viable local market could be stimulated and encouraged? So these are some of the questions I hope our panel today may help us explore. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined this afternoon by three folk with fantastic credentials to talk to us about shellfish. For first-hand experience, we've got Guy Grieve up in the Isle of Mull. He goes under the water diving for scallops. So he sees it on the front line. He also runs a business called the Ethical Shellfish Company, based on Mull on Scotland's west coast. Pam Brunton buys local shellfish for the restaurant that she runs on the shores of Loch Fyne in Argyll. And she has not just bundles of experience and expertise cooking and serving shellfish at the restaurant, which is called Inver, but she also has the palate and the imagination to think really creatively about how diners engage with shellfish on the plate. And Nick Underdown, who's also based up in the Highlands, he has been researching and campaigning in the area of sustainability with regards to fish, shellfish, and the whole marine environment for many years, and has a fantastic oversight into all the issues involved, all the way from harvesting through to consumption. So this afternoon, I'm going to give each of them a chance to tell you what it is they do, what their thoughts are about some of the issues, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to thrash things out as a panel and respond to any questions that you as an audience may wish to ask or contribute or suggest, as Shane suggested earlier, using that Q&A button, which I'll be able to see. And hopefully, if you have a point or a question, if you type it in there, I can see it and hopefully having a chance to address that and address as many of those that are raised as possible in the course of our discussion. So first, let me hand over to Guy Grieve up in Tobermory on the island of Mull. As I said, Guy is a scallop diver. He's the guy that's quite truly sourcing the shellfish that ends up on the plates that we have down here in where I am in Edinburgh, but in London, and obviously a lot of scallops end up overseas, as I said, elsewhere. So I'm going to hand over to Guy. Please let us know a little bit, Guy, about what it is you do, how it all works, how things have changed in the last 6 months, and where you see the whole market for shellfish and the relationship that we have locally and further afield with the product that you harvest. Guy, over to you.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here and lovely to meet everyone in a albeit virtual surrounding. So we've been dive fishing for king scallops for 11 years now from the Isle of Mull, and from the start we didn't want to export, because the moment you start exporting, you land up in a horrendous commodity type conversation with people. And you deal with people, buyers who have no commitment other than the bottom line to what you're doing. And so we just felt we don't want to do it. We don't want to deal with people who are, you know, they'll be trading bananas one week, dive scallops the next week. You know, we didn't want to do that. We loved it too much, the scallop itself, Pecten Maximus. In fact, I was actually thinking of naming our two sons Pecten and Maximus, you know, so that we could turn up to chefs and introduce. Chef, I'd like you to meet Pecten Maximus. So we started out delivering to Edinburgh, and then word began to spread that, and we began to find chefs who had the same passion as us, the same refusal to compromise, and They like the fact that they receive their scallops in cardboard boxes, that we refuse to use polystyrene. They like the fact that we would live or die by our one product. I mean, how stupid is that? We've depended on one product the whole time we've done this business. And so it began to grow. And then we had our boats, our two boats, I Skipper one, there was the other boats, our other company boat, and together those boats would land about a ton of scallops a week. And gradually we started to buy off other dive fishermen, so that eventually, before this asteroid hit us, we were sending out 10,000 pieces a week of dive scallops to our market. And what was so wonderful about that was each of our dive fishermen was having quite a small effect on where they were fishing. But as it all came together under our organization and our marketing and with our own fishing, it became something quite big. And because we were selling this at a luxury cost, it meant that we would pay no one who worked for us below £10 an hour. It meant that we put £30,000 a month into this island economy every month, you know, January and February, and, you know, when the tourists aren't here. And then we began to think, geez, you know what? By mistake, we just happen to have a totally Brexit-proof business. When we were all thinking about Brexit, we thought if the pound plummets, that's fine. You know, we're delivering to the UK. It's only going to get better. And then we get COVID. And in 3 days, we went from 10,000 pieces a week to zero. Absolute zero. There's no money behind us, even though I might sound like I'm off the set of Brideshead Revisited. There's no money to support us. So we had to, necessity is the mother of invention. We've always had passionate feedback from people. What about home cooks? We're always going to be there for our chefs. Chefs are everything for us. Chefs are what made our business. So we started an experiment. Thankfully, our sons had just come of age in time for us to become a third world family. So my boys were now kicked out of bed at 4 in the morning, and we've been doing 18-hour shifts, doing direct deliveries to households in Edinburgh and Glasgow. And unbelievably, it became something really quite serious. I never used to have any respect necessarily for the buying power of the general public. For example, when we come to the end of a day's fishing, you'll put your 200, 300, 400 kilos of scallops in keeps, and you'll store them in the sea, and you'll put, let's say, 6 or 7 in a plastic bag for your fry that night. And I always used to laugh when in Ulva I'd be getting off my boat with my 6 or 7 scallops, and some tourist would say to me, "Hey, is that your day's catch?" You know, and you'd think, that's not my day's catch. But anyway, people we found were passionate, were involved, were very educated, and were fantastic cooks. And before we knew it, we started actually experiencing a growth in our database. You know, we've now got over 1,000 people who want to buy from us in Edinburgh and Glasgow. And what we were beginning to think was, in the first week or first month, how much of this is charity and how much of this is reality? And invariably we found that the reality is that there's a bit of a change going on, that people seem to be wanting to have meaning in their lives. We've been forced away from our sources of cultural happiness, you know, cinemas, theaters, music, So people have been pushed into a smaller place, and they want to be sure that that place that they've been forced into, that corner they're in, has got meaning. So we found that was encouraging. We've just launched our new website today, and Ethical Shellfish Company, co.uk. And next week we are starting fully now to do direct to customers in Scotland, and then we hope to grow it from there. So that's been a bit of a light in the darkness for us, but we've still been very, very severely laid low by this. Now time for some darkness. This is what I'm worried about. That, you know, yes, this is a golden age for us The public are more informed than ever before. They've got more sense of meaning. They've got more demand for quality, for a really properly produced product. But is it a green light now for those who have always been rubberizing, belittling, destroying our environment in order to enrich themselves? Because certain chefs and lots of people in the market are going to say, and I've had this quote unquote from a very high executive chef. He said to me, this year, we can't have any morals. Bertolt Brecht, grub first, then ethics. You know what I mean? So now more than ever, with less people dive fishing, certainly, marine protected areas, which were already being illegally dredged. Now more than ever, I'm sure blind eyes are going to be turned to that. So I'm very worried that it's going to give further folky justification for the destruction of our environment. Before it was, I'm the hearty fisherman, and they would weave and envelop their behaviors behind lovely folklore about the fishermen, and people would wave to them on the road and everything was fine. And then they go and trash your environment and make money out of it. So now there's a further layer of defense for these forms of fishing, in the sense that, well, we've got to. We're all up against the wall. There's further reason for those politicians like Fergus Ewing, who is an enemy of progress and an enemy of the environment, to do nothing. So it is, we are in a strange place where I believe there is going to be increasing demand for what we do, but those enemies of progress, those that destroy, and it's not their fault, it's the government's fault, and the government that is dragging its heels and has no vision regarding our inshore. It's just bought them yet more time. So I'm concerned about that, because I believe this government has no vision, the Scottish government, for our inshore marine environment. They're keener to back foreign multinational companies who are treating Scotland like a third world country. Take a look at Scottish Salmon Company. It's a Norwegian company. And they have no vision for the small boat, the small producer, producing a high quality luxury product that enables that producer to pay the people that work for them well, as opposed to rubberizing our environment to create a bulk devalued protein at the end of it. But who would expect vision from a Fergus Ewing, who was a lawyer for 30 years? I was speaking to him recently. He was there next to me. We were sitting in a meeting. And I asked him, Mr. Ewing, would you consider allowing dredging into our marine protected areas? Because various dredging lobbyists have been trying to get scallop dredging allowed into our marine protected areas, to fish, to dredge, quote unquote, around the special features, which is obviously insanity. It's like destroying a whole forest to leave one Scots pine standing. It makes no ecological sense. And he looked at me, and I stared into his two eyes, and I saw nothing. It was uncanny, unnerving. And he said, yes, I certainly am. So he is considering allowing that. And that's because the language that the lobbyists speak is the same language as the lawyers, who are to a large extent our politicians, which is a legalistic, itinerized, itemized approach to the marine environment, whereas it should be an ecosystem-based form of thinking, which is all about the benefit to the entire ecosystem, marine ecosystem, including that human ecosystem that lives around that ecosystem. But it's not there. And it's bad publicity for politicians to go against the peddlers of the fishing folk message, because it doesn't make good headlines. And finally, the problem with our political system is that, hey, the only currency these politicians have got is votes. And they're only thinking 4 years ahead. This is a 10-year, a 5-year, a 10-year thing. But the one point of encouragement is that the moment you do preserve the marine environment, it bounces back so fast. So it's all there for us. But the question is, have we got the people at the top to make it happen? And I don't believe we do.
Great stuff, Guy. Thank you very much. And I think I come back to that sense that you say it's the legalistic language, you know, that it seems so remote, and some people know how to talk the game. You know, food is another language. And if you're connecting with people through the food that you're harvesting through to a public, there's an opportunity to engage, and there's another form of language, and maybe can we elevate that, and that helps you kind of understand more, we hope, some of the issues and the challenges that you're talking about. Okay, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to introduce Pam Brunton. Pam, the fact that you're there in your whites encourages me to think that you've actually been working and cooking, and you maybe even have the odd customer coming through your doors, which must be miraculous.
Yes.
In this day and age of hospitality. Absolutely recognize that things are really tough for people like you in the hospitality trade. Thank you so much for coming to join us today. Pam, as someone kind of on the next stage, you know, guys on the seabed, he's picking up scallops from there. You're the next stage. You're buying them. You're buying shellfish. You're buying products from the sea, which the sea. I mean, we can't quite see it out your window, but the sea is just there.
It is.
That's fine. With a customer, grab them.
Live customers.
And so, you know, you're in that position, and then you're putting it in front of the public and customers. So, you know, tell us your take on things, and how you see this that from the place where you are, how you see the whole shellfish picture.
So we have, like, we are literally right on the shores of Loch Fyne, which has historically been a great herring fishing loch. Unfortunately, we've overfished the herring, but what is still available out there is a lot of shellfish, a lot of nephrops, a lot of langoustines, some lobsters, and brown crab, which is my personal favourite. And we feature all of them on the menu. They're a fixture at weekends. We get the fresh shellfish delivery on Friday mornings, and we buy what we expect to sell over the weekend, and then invariably sell out by Sunday lunch, Sunday night. I am, in my experience over the last 5 years of running Inver, is the people come here looking for the shellfish. We're right on the shores of the loch, and we're doing what is not necessarily as common as it should be in Scotland, which is serving the produce from right outside the window. Sometimes Mary, who brings us the langoustines and the crab, actually arrives in her boat and unloads the creels, which folk love to see. And very much as Guy was talking, we only buy creeled langoustines and prawns. We would never, and diver scallops when I can get them. We would never ever buy dredged scallops, not even in 2020. And all the all the challenges we have faced, I don't believe it's the environment's problem to pick up. This is a human-made problem, and we will deal with it regardless. But I also understand that there's a whole industry out there who don't necessarily think along those lines. So we have been we've been lucky as well, I think, in that we've been very busy since we reopened again in July after the 4-month closure. I think certainly over the last few years, being in the middle of nowhere has been more of a challenge to running a restaurant than it has been a boon. But this year it has changed, and we've been quite lucky in that the dynamic seems to be that people want to leave cities and come to somewhere where there is more space, less people, fresh air, and obviously great food and cooking. So but we've been very busy over the last few months. This new development, I think, is going to change things again. Exactly how remains to be seen, but we are for the moment still open and serving while we can during the day, and then we have 4 bothies, so we can serve to residents at night. But obviously it changes the business quite dramatically. But back to shellfish. It's always been a popular part of our menu. It's been something we've had since the start. It's almost a little mini menu within the menu. We serve oysters, langoustines, and crab, rarely lobsters, which is mostly for personal reasons. And they're always ethically produced, ethically sourced, and relatively expensive. which I think is kind of the crux of the issue in Scotland. They are a luxury food. And it's certainly, if you're going to buy the hand creeled, the hand dived, they will remain expensive, and rightfully so. They should be. This should never be an everyday food for people. And this, it's a luxury treat food. And therefore not necessarily something that will always be accessible to the majority of the population. If we want to keep the standards of the catch up, and we want to pay the fishermen, the creelers and the divers what they should be paid, then this is never going to be like your bread and butter kind of food. This is a luxury treat food. You know, our menu is diverse, and we have some things on it that are £7, and we have a plate of langoustines which is 25 quid, or a whole crab. And so, but I kind of feel that the dynamic with shellfish in this country, it kind of just, it continues the history of shellfish collection in this country, in that historically, as you touched on, the things that the market has rewarded financially have always been sold. So that people, you know, 100, 200, 300 years ago, when they were harvesting shellfish on the shores, the things that would fetch a market value either paid part of their rent to their landlords, or it was sold to markets in Edinburgh or London or possibly abroad. Whereas the things that didn't have a value, which might mean whelks, but there was a point where they had a great market value as well, in Edinburgh as well as down south. Those things were eaten in the house. Anything that they could make money out of were sold. And I sort of see that this as just being a continuation of that historic dynamic. It's just the dynamic within that is that it's not, the market isn't just abroad. Within Scotland, the market is to the people who can afford it. So your middle classes, your upper classes, people with disposable income who can eat in nice restaurants and pay 25, 30 quid for a plate of langoustines and crabs and scallops. So yeah, we're in quite a unique situation here, obviously, because we are right on the shores of the loch, and Lachlan Bay, which is outside the window there, has a cockle bed, a cockle bed has been there for centuries. So some of our staff during lockdown went out and taught themselves how to cockle, and enjoyed some fresh shellfish that way. And there's mussels all over the rocks as well. And things like that. There's plenty to forage of wild food. But yeah, as for the things that the market rewards, yeah, these are things for the privileged, not for the supermarket shelf, not for the everyday. Whether you choose to eat it as a luxury or you eschew it completely. And I think it also comes back to as well, like I'm very interested that Guy has found that the public are interested in cooking things like scallops, because I know that will be prohibitive as well to people. Like, there isn't necessarily the cooking skills in every home in the country to understand how to shuck and cook a scallop, or how to pick down a langoustine, because there just hasn't historically been that in the country. Like the people, you know, the people on the, I have friends, I've lived on the west coast of Scotland on and off for, I don't know, 10, 15 years or something. And, you know, I have a lot of friends in fishing villages who do get the prawns, get the langoustine straight off the boats and are perfectly happy cooking them. But that isn't necessarily the case all over the central belt where most of the population is, because they don't generally see shellfish except ready prepared on a fishmonger's slab, maybe. So it's very interesting that Guy is seeing a market for that, and I'd be interested to find out who his customers actually are within that. Yeah.
Well, I think there's probably there may well be an overlap. You know, the kind of people.
They're not overwhelmed middle class.
Sorry.
Sorry.
One guy. Go on.
Oh, sorry. No, just to say, actually, they're fantastically. What's been wonderful is it's not been upper middle class to large. It's been a really big spread of people that have been buying, and that to me is really encouraging. Yeah.
And if I may add, I think there's probably a crossover between the people who are prepared to or desire to learn what to do with scallops or have that encouragement. There's actually an overlap with people who are prepared to get in their car or maybe their bikes or their boats and go to places like Inver because they know the food is great. They know, they've heard how inspiring it is just to be in that locale and eat the kind of food that represents the very place where you're in. And that sort of sense of adventurism and sense of openness and a desire to find out more, I think is probably something that is more prevalent now than it has been in the past.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to take the chance now to move on and give Nick the floor, as it were, for a little bit. And Nick, we've had some very particular viewpoints because of Pam and Guy and where they are and what they do, and you see a kind of wider picture of the whole marine environment and the challenges that it faces, particularly in Scotland. And I just wondered whether you would care to share with us some of your thoughts on this scene and the place that shellfish has within it.
Glad to, Donald. Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks very much for the opportunity to contribute to this talk. So yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of ground covered there already, and much of what I was planning to say has actually been kind of introduced really quite well from these various angles. But I guess just quick introduction about Open Seas. So I work for a small charity called Open Seas. We're based in Scotland, and I guess our starting point is, seafood sustainability issues are often concerned about issues that are from far-flung areas, that are remote to where consumers are actually based. We obsess around tuna fisheries in the Pacific, for example, but as Open Seas, our remit, our focus really is on the pressing environmental issues that are in our domestic waters, and we're trying to shine a bit of a light on that, and trying to inform all parts of the supply chain about really what the processes and ethical sustainability considerations are in taking seafood from Scottish waters to consumer plates, and see whether providing that information makes people change their decisions about what they do, whether they buy differently, whether they make different policy decisions. And we try and take a reasonably sort of broad front in terms of the people that we talk to about our research. So we investigate, we research, and we report on instances of where we think, unfortunately, the industry is not operating well, where there is, as Guy has said, illegal activities inside protected areas, but also legal fishing that is basically damaging the very kind of lifeblood of our marine ecosystems. So a lot of the new fisheries which have developed in the last 50 or 60 years in Scotland, using increasingly intensive methods that damage the very habitats that marine ecosystems depend on, the seafood that we used to enjoy from our seas depend on, the fish that are no longer there. And yeah, and I think it's really important. We're really into trying to promote sustainable alternatives. So, Guy, Pam here are sort of beacons of hope from our perspective, people who are trying to do the right thing, people who are dedicated to sustainability and have the long-term, basically the long-term interest of our seafood industry at their heart and are integrating that into their business models. Fantastic. I guess we are painfully conscious this is a very, very hard time for industry, and the kind of choices that we've got to chart a more sustainable course are very political. But we cannot shy away from the fact that our fisheries are just not in good shape in Scotland. We have seen widespread declines of key fish stocks. the totemic example is North Sea cod, you know, which has been delisted as a sustainable option. You know, this used to be a mainstay. But I mean, I think a huge part of what the Scottish public, we as a people, kind of forget, you know, there's this kind of hidden tragedies of lost fisheries that used to be, that are simply no longer there. You know, like scientific advice now is that there shall be no cod being caught out of the west coast of Scotland. You know, there used to be a vibrant fishery of, you know, several thousand tonnes being caught annually from the west coast stock. That is simply no longer there. I think that's a really important dimension, and it's crucially relevant to shellfish for the reasons that I'll come on to. You know, like, so the reason why we have, the history of Scottish fishing has been one of consolidation, steady consolidation. It's been one of steady intensification of the very methods that we're using to harvest seafood. And, you know, that's left us in a situation now where the very structure and offering of our seafood industry is markedly different from what it used to be. We used to have a much more diverse offering. And now, as Donald highlighted in the introduction here, we have a huge reliance upon shellfish. You know, langoustine, £86 million industry. You know, it's the second largest catch by value in Scotland. You know, as Donald said, it used to be, you know, a wasteful byproduct, you know, from other fisheries. And, you know, what's going on there? I think, like, you know, how has that happened? Why has that happened? Like, I want to show, if I can make the technology work, a short video that will hopefully explain that, really from the horse's mouth, from a fisherman who is no longer with us now, which is a very sad thing, but who spoke truth in a very eloquent way, and who I will just share. His name is Ali MacLeod. I'll see if I can make this work. Apologies if there's any issues here.
We don't seem to, there's human frailty, you know, we don't seem to learn from past mistakes. You know, the herring on the west coast is a classic example of how not to manage a fishery. My dad and my grandfather were herring fishermen. There's very, very few boys that fish for herring now. They're all in huge purse-seine netters, whereas the herring was done first by drift net, then it went on to a ring net, and then went on to purse-seine net. And the technology outran the environment, and the technology has always got to be capped, because we can basically wipe out everything that we're catching. We've got the technology to do it, so we have to have something else that holds us back, that outgrows. We just seem to outgrow our environment. And when you think of it, we're catching shellfish, which are they're animals that are just running along the bottom of the seabed, eating detritus that falls through the food chain, that falls through the water column, and they're scavengers. Now we've fished out the cod, the haddock, the hake, the herring. There's some mackerel out there, but not in commercial quantities. That's all been fished out. We're right at the bottom of the chain. And now some places off the American coast and Mexican Gulf, we're hearing they're catching jellyfish. Now, jellyfish are single-cell plankton, you know, but the Japanese eat jellyfish salads. Now, there's guys that are taking $1,000 hauls of jellyfish, or spending a whole day catching shrimp, and they fished out the shrimp. And the shrimp are the guys that are just running along the bottom, just catching the little bits, eating the little bits of stuff. So we've got nowhere else to go. If we don't redress the balance and actually get the whitefish back, as well as keeping the prawns and the langoustine, the crab, the lobster, if we look after that and get the whitefish back, we take pressure off what we're doing, you know, with the scallops, all that shellfish, and we can take some boats away from catching shellfish, and actually get back onto cod and haddock.
I just wanted to show you that short interview. It's part of a wider interview that was filmed a few years ago, just before Ali's sad death at sea. But I think he made very clear this point that, you know, it's actually about a choice. There's a trade-off, and our current fisheries are essentially trading off the future health and diversity of our fisheries with this reliance upon shellfish, which is being caught in a way which is not massively sustainable. I think it's really worth noting that langoustine, you know, this multi-million-pound industry, Scotland is the largest producer of langoustine on the planet. You know, 90% of that langoustine is being caught by trawling, bottom trawling, which fundamentally modifies our seabed habitats and also has a high incidence of bycatch within the fishery. So it's catching juvenile fish from stocks that are struggling. So juvenile cod from that struggling population of West Coast cod has been caught in the trawls of nephrops trawlers on the West Coast. Now, as an organisation, we mean no ill at all to West Coast nephrops trawlers, but we do think that there is a sustainability problem here that needs addressed. If we want our cod back, we cannot continuing to exploit this resource in the way that we're currently doing. And, you know, this is just a choice. This is a choice, a complex choice for the supply chain, for consumers, politicians, in a sort of convergence of pressure to make that transition from a highly unsustainable situation that we're currently in to a better place. And that's a very difficult journey that we know that we need to get on, and that is taking much longer than it should. We share very similar concerns to Guy's about the continued rubbelisation, as he calls it, of the seabed, the damage that's being done to the very sort of, as I say, life support system for our marine ecosystems. You know, just there's a lot to talk about here, but I'll just kind of finish just by saying, you know, I think the conversation to date has been around, you know, what can we do? What can we do about this? What can the conservation charities and whatnot do about this? What are the laws we need to pass? What are the buying decisions we need to make? And I think the debate is now shifting from what can we do to what must we do? You know, that we really are reaching a point where there is a crisis in biodiversity on the planet. There is a crisis in terms of the food security and the resilience of our food sector in Scotland. And we need to make reasonably difficult decisions about what we want the shape of our fisheries to be in the future, because the current situation is not in a resilient position. I'll leave it there, Donald, because I think time's probably against us. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Brilliant, Nick. Thank you very much, and thanks for introducing that video, because it's very powerful when you speak to people who really have that lived experience and know things as intimately as fishermen do, or as I suggested earlier, people like Guy who are kind of going into that hidden zone under the water that we just don't see, we don't know, and can report from that front line. One of the things I would like to raise with you, and it's actually come in part from a question that's been posted by one of our viewers this afternoon. If shellfish has an exclusivity about it, which we kind of recognise from its high value, which quite rightly Pam pointed out, you know, it should carry that real cost because of the people that are involved. You know, the effort that's involved. However, if it has that exclusive cachet, will people buy into the, you know, have the same sense of engagement with it, which almost leads to a greater concern for the environment in which it comes from and a greater care? You know, because you can see how, on the one level, the exclusivity of it can turn people off. And the question that came from our audience was, what's going on when langoustine turn into scampi? They get breadcrumbs around them and it's suddenly a completely different proposition. It's almost down to being pub food, a working class, you know, or not working class really, but kind of everyman food. What's the dynamic going on there? It's a kind of peculiar thing whereby you stick breadcrumbs on it and it suddenly changes its whole nature. So I don't know whether you you know, is one of the problems here, this sense of exclusive cachet, actually, is that a sticking point somehow and a problem? I don't know if one of you wants to respond to that thought.
I'm happy to say something about the scampi dynamic. That I'm pretty confident in saying that would not be the hand creeled, lifted individually out of the water scampi. That would be your dredged scampi, your dredged nephrops. Their carcasses are probably damaged. Therefore, they recuperate what they can in the tails, and they're peeled and they get breadcrumbed and dumped into a fryer. You know, like, is there anything in itself wrong with deep frying a langoustine tail? Nope, it's quite a nice, fast way to cook a delicate piece of meat. It protects it. It cooks in the steam from the breadcrumbs. That in itself, like, as a kind of is not a problem. But the fact that it's then sold in pubs so cheaply as it generally is, indicates that was not a quality product to begin with. And that would be my issue with it. I do know of you know, a good example of a pub who actually take great quality langoustine and breadcrumb them and batter them as scampi themselves, but you get little piles of kind of 6 on a plate and it costs 15 quid. It doesn't go like, it's not, you know, 7.50 for scampi and chips or 12 quid or whatever it is.
And it's kind of adds to a point you made earlier that really, if something's got a price tag on it and it's an honest price tag, then that speaks of where it's come from and what's been involved.
Yeah,
and if it's got a cheap tag, that says something as well.
Yeah, to be honest, and that whole dynamic doesn't stop with shellfish. That's like across the board. If you want to pay for good quality ingredients where the environment hasn't borne the brunt of the production costs, where the producers themselves have been paid fairly, then you are going to be paying more for the food in your shopping basket or on your plate or in your restaurant. You know, it doesn't just stop with shellfish.
Guy, you wanted to.
Well, I think that's fascinating to hear that. And just on the scampi front, I think we could be doing a lot more with squat lobster, which I think could provide, you know, there's huge amounts of squat lobster that could be caught. And I'm sure good chefs would be able to come up with an ethical scampi alternative. You heard it here. Look, I think we've got all sorts of ideas here, and off the back of what Nick Underdown's saying there. You know, there's an issue here too, that, you know, in order to help give us some light to try and find a way through here, let's try and have some examples. And there are examples. I've got friends who fish in Norway, and routinely I get a call from one of them who says to me, is the dredging still going on there? And I say, yes. And he just laughs and laughs and laughs. Because the Norwegians allowed dredging into Norway for a year. And then based on what they saw and on British science, they banned it. And they had one of the world's greatest fishing industries, worth 90 billion a year. The problem in Norway is that they're catching too many fish. In fact, I think probably Norway's responsible for seeding the entire North Atlantic, for, you know, rather the entire North Sea, for our fishing fleets out of Peterhead and stuff. I bet you the focal point of that fertility is a big amount of it's coming off Norway, because you're not allowed to dredge within 6 miles of the shore there. And, you know, the stories of fecundity there underwater are unbelievable. Scallop diving friends of mine say it's like the seabed is like the lid of a jeweled box. I've seen here in 11 years of diving, 3 monkfish, 1 halibut, and a whole bunch of undersized flat fish. I've had friends in Norway saying at the end of their day's diving, they think, oh, at the end of the week, let's give ourselves a treat for some monk, you know, let's treat myself to a monkfish. And they think, well, that one's too small, that one's too small, that one's too small, that one's too small, that one's, and they take that one. So Norway is the example to us. Why was it so easy in Norway for them to deal with that? Because sociologically speaking, there are no fogs there that you've got here. The Norwegian culture has not got a long tradition of established minorities enriching themselves whilst impoverishing us all. And there is an established minority at sea, and it's called our mobile fishing fleet. And they are impoverishing the majority. 79% of the fishermen here are small boat fishermen, creelers, divers. And there's a destructive and damaging minority which is not being managed I'm not talking about being banned. It's not being managed by the politicians. Why isn't it being managed by the politicians? Enter the great British sociological cloud, because it would be anathema to them politically to go into it. They can't battle all of the red herrings that obscure the fact. So long story short, Norway is a great example to us.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Guy. Let me just give Nick just a chance just to add in a couple of quick couple of points there. Sorry, Nick, to rush you, but give you a quick
no,
chance.
Well, I mean, just to say, it may be anathema currently, but I think like there is a rising political tide where there's a greater awareness that we need to be making better sustainability choices as a nation for the future generation. That is a rising awareness, and that the political tide will change on that. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't think that was the case. It's going to take some time, and and I think it is important to recognise that sociological kind of component of all this. This change is not going to happen overnight. We know what needs to happen. It's just that it can't happen overnight. I think there's fear within parts of the fishing fleet that these changes would be forced on them overnight, such that they couldn't make good their plans to transition away from their existing activities. That is a piece of political statecraft that needs to be achieved with good leadership from government, and that is not an easy thing to do, and it requires money. But this is a priority issue because seafood industry is a big part of what Scotland does, and it deserves that kind of level of investment. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Nick. I think it's so important that we remember that there are never easy answers. If someone gives you an easy answer in the realm of food or fisheries or agriculture, don't believe it, because it's not there. It doesn't exist. But part of our increasing knowledge of food and part of our increasing awareness of food is realizing how complex some of these things are and accepting that. But being prepared to arm yourself with more knowledge, being prepared to engage more, and to see all the different component parts, whether it's a seabed or human livelihoods, or to see vested interests for what they are, to be able to notice them and to spot them. So yeah.
There's no vision.
It's been great to. Sorry, Guy, just very quickly. I think I'm probably under a bit of pressure to wrap up from Shane. So
no vision. There's no vision, and all there is from government is strategy to just keep people quiet until the next election, to dumb down little fires. But if there was vision in government, things would be resolved very quickly, actually. But there isn't.
And the important thing is that as the population out there, they're eating food. There is actually an opportunity, whether everyone's always taking it, to engage with issues just because you're eating food every day. These things are relevant and important. Anyway, our hour has come to an end. I'm so grateful. That I'm very proud of the fact that we've got someone in the Black Isle, someone in the island of Mull, someone in Argyll, someone in Edinburgh, someone down in London, all come together through the power of the technology, but to have a really stimulating and interesting, engaged, knowledgeable discussion. So thank you all very much. Thank you out there, audience, wherever you may be. It may be even more remote than we've managed with the panel. Thanks to the points you've made and the questions you've asked. That's been a great contribution. There's plenty more on this Terra Madre weekend, this Terra Madre Fringe weekend that Slow Food UK are putting on. Please have a good browse through the programme, see what's there. It's all for free. We would encourage you a few donations if you feel a micro payment might be suitable, because if these kind of operations can wash their face, then they'll happen more regularly, because there's definitely engagement, there's definitely interest and enthusiasm to talk about a whole range of different things. And you can get a taste of them across the weekend. So unless Shane wants to say anything else in the way of wrapping up, I'll sign out from this end. Thanks very much. I want to be part of it.
I want to thank Donald. The chair never thanks himself, of course. So Donald, thank you very much for your superb chairing and putting this panel together.